My name is Serafina Hayes. I'm 32 years old, and I never imagined I'd become the person who had to choose between family loyalty and protecting my child. Last Wednesday afternoon, I walked into my parents' house to find something that would change our family forever. My daughter Willow was on her hands and knees scrubbing their bathroom floor while tears silently streamed down her face. My sister's twin boys, Marcus and Mason, were lounging in the living room playing video games, laughing at something on the screen. What I heard next made my blood run cold. "Stop sniffling, Willow." My mother's sharp voice echoed from the hallway. "Your cousins finish their chores in half the time. Maybe if you worked harder instead of feeling sorry for yourself, you'd be done by now." In that moment, watching my 8-year-old daughter scrub tiles that grown adults should be cleaning, something fundamental shifted inside me. The rent payments I'd been making for my parents' apartment were about to stop forever. But before I tell you what happened next, I need you to understand how we got here. Growing up as the youngest child in the Hayes family meant understanding one simple truth. My older sister Brooklyn was everything I could never be. She was 3 years older, effortlessly popular, and somehow managed to turn every family gathering into a celebration of her latest achievement. I was the afterthought, the one who cleaned up after family dinners while Brooklyn got to relax and chat with relatives. Our childhood home in a working-class neighborhood of Chicago was filled with unspoken rules. Brooklyn's messes were creative expression. Mine were carelessness that needed correction. When Brooklyn struggled with math, our parents hired a tutor. When I struggled with the same subject 2 years later, I was told to figure it out because money doesn't grow on trees. The favoritism wasn't subtle. For Brooklyn's 16th birthday, our parents threw a surprise party with 30 friends and a professional DJ. For mine, we had grocery store cake with just immediate family. When I asked why the celebration was so different, my father, Robert, just shrugged and said, "Brooklyn's more social than you are, Sarah." We planned what made sense. My mother, Carol, a receptionist at a dental office, had perfected the art of dismissive comments disguised as motherly concern. "Brooklyn just has that spark, you know?" she'd tell relatives while I stood nearby. "Sarah's more practical. Not everyone can be a star." Despite the constant comparisons, I threw myself into academics. While Brooklyn skated by with C's and D's, I maintained straight A's. When college application time came, I received a partial scholarship to Northwestern University for journalism. Brooklyn enrolled at the local community college, dropped out after one semester, and moved back home. My parents attended her brief graduation ceremony but claimed they were too busy with work to come to my actual university graduation 4 years later. After college, I landed an entry-level position at a Chicago marketing firm. Through determination and countless late nights, I worked my way up to senior account manager. The irony wasn't lost on me that the practical daughter had built a successful career while the star child was still figuring out her path. My marriage to David happened quickly, perhaps too quickly. We met at a networking event, bonded over our shared love of travel and ambition, and were engaged within 8 months. Willow arrived 2 years later, a beautiful baby with David's dark hair and my stubborn chin. For a brief moment, I thought I'd finally created the loving family I'd always wanted. But David wasn't ready for the realities of parenthood. When Willow turned 3 and started asserting her independence, he grew increasingly frustrated with the chaos of family life. The final blow came when I discovered he'd been having an affair with a colleague for 6 months. Our divorce was swift but painful, leaving me as a single mother navigating both career advancement and child-rearing alone. When my parents offered to help with childcare, I was desperate enough to accept despite our complicated history. Willow should know her grandparents, my mother had said, and I wanted to believe they could love her better than they'd loved me. Brooklyn had married her high school boyfriend Marcus Sr., and their twin boys were born just a year after Willow. The family dynamic I'd hoped would improve only intensified with the next generation. From the beginning, Marcus and Mason were treated like princes, while Willow was an afterthought. When all 3 children visited my parents together, the boys received new toys and attention while Willow was given coloring books and told to play quietly. Family photos prominently featured Brooklyn's boys with my parents, while Willow was often cropped out or relegated to the background. 3 years ago, when my parents faced eviction from their apartment, I stepped in without hesitation. My father had been laid off from his job at the post office, and my mother's part-time dental receptionist salary wasn't enough to cover their bills. They were 2 months behind on rent and facing homelessness. "It's just temporary," they promised as I set up automatic transfers to pay their $1,800 monthly rent. Just until Dad finds another job. That temporary arrangement had stretched into 3 years with no end in sight. My father found sporadic work doing odd jobs, but never anything stable or well-paying. Meanwhile, Brooklyn contributed nothing to our parents' support despite living just 20 minutes away and having a husband with steady employment at a warehouse. I told myself I was being a good daughter, but deep down I knew I was still trying to buy the love and approval that had always been reserved for Brooklyn. Every month, $1,800 left my account while I watched my parents shower affection on Marcus and Mason that they'd never shown Willow or me. The warning signs had been accumulating for months. Willow would come home from my parents' house unusually quiet, or she'd mention that Grandpa said she was slower than her cousins at completing puzzles. Once, she asked why Grandma always made her clean up after Marcus and Mason when they made messes. "Because you're the only girl," I'd said, trying to normalize what felt fundamentally wrong. Sometimes adults have different expectations. But last Wednesday changed everything. My final client meeting of the day ended an hour early, so I decided to surprise Willow by picking her up ahead of schedule. As I pulled into my parents' apartment complex, I noticed Brooklyn's car in the visitor parking. She must have stopped by after dropping the boys off. My parents lived in a 2-bedroom unit on the second floor of a complex I was essentially financing. I climbed the familiar stairs and used my key to enter, planning to surprise everyone with the early arrival. The scene that greeted me was like a nightmare version of my own childhood. Through the hallway, I could see into the living room where Marcus and Mason, both 9 years old, were sprawled on the couch playing video games. Brooklyn sat nearby scrolling through her phone, occasionally laughing at something on her screen. The sound of scrubbing led me toward the bathroom, where I found Willow on her hands and knees with a bucket of cleaning supplies beside her. Her small hands were red from the harsh chemicals, and her school clothes were soaked with dirty water. Tears dripped steadily onto the tile floor she was trying to clean. "I can't get it clean enough," she whispered to herself, scrubbing the same spot over and over. My mother appeared in the bathroom doorway, hands on her hips, surveying Willow's work with obvious disapproval. "The corners are still dirty, Willow. Marcus and Mason cleaned this bathroom last week in half the time. Why can't you be more like them?" "But Grandma, the brush is too big for my hands," Willow said quietly. "Excuses," my mother snapped. "Your cousins didn't make excuses when they were your age. They just did the work." From the living room, I heard Marcus call out, "Grandma, can we have more cookies?" "Of course, sweetie," my mother called back warmly. "I'll bring them right out." The contrast was devastating. My daughter was being forced to clean their bathroom with industrial-strength chemicals, while her cousins were being served cookies and entertainment. But what broke my heart completely was what I heard next. "Mommy says Willow's dad left because she was too much trouble," Mason announced loudly from the living room. "Mason, that's enough," Brooklyn said, but there was no real reproach in her voice. "But it's true, right?" Marcus added. "That's why Uncle David doesn't live with them anymore?" Willow's scrubbing stopped. I watched her shoulders shake as she processed what her cousins had said. My parents' silence spoke volumes about their complicity in allowing such cruelty. "That's not true," Willow whispered, but her voice was so small I barely heard it. "Willow, focus on your cleaning," my mother commanded, ignoring the devastating comment entirely. "The floor won't scrub itself." That was the moment I stepped fully into view. "What exactly is going on here?" 5 heads turned toward me, with expressions ranging from surprise to guilt to defiance. Willow's face crumpled with relief as she scrambled to her feet and ran to me, her wet, chemical-burned hands wrapping around my waist. "Mommy," she sobbed into my shirt. "I tried to clean it good, but it's too hard." I knelt down to her level, examining her reddened hands and tear-stained face. Sweetheart, you should never have to clean with chemicals like these. This is an adult job. Serafina, my mother said, recovering from her surprise. We weren't expecting you for another hour. Obviously, I replied, helping Willow wash her hands in the sink. How long has this been going on? What do you mean? My father appeared in the doorway, his expression immediately defensive. I looked pointedly at the cleaning supplies, then at Marcus and Mason lounging comfortably in the living room with their snacks and games. I mean, how long has Willow been doing household cleaning while her cousins get to relax? The children all help around here, my mother said stiffly. We believe in teaching responsibility. Really? I stood up, keeping Willow close to my side. Marcus, Mason, what chores did you do today? The boys exchanged glances. We helped carry in groceries, Marcus said uncertainly. That took about 2 minutes, I pointed out. What else? Silence. I turned back to my parents. So Willow scrubs her bathroom with harsh chemicals for over an hour, while Marcus and Mason carry in a few grocery bags and then get cookies and video games as a reward? Don't exaggerate, my father interjected. She's learning valuable life skills. By cleaning your bathroom? At 8 years old? With chemicals that burned her hands. Brooklyn finally spoke up from her position on the couch. Sarah, don't be so dramatic. A little responsibility never hurt anyone. You mean like the responsibility you're teaching your boys by letting them watch TV while their cousin does manual labor? Brooklyn's face flushed. My boys help plenty at home. I'm sure they do, I said sarcastically. Willow, get your backpack. We're leaving. Now wait just a minute. My father's voice took on the authoritative tone that had intimidated me throughout childhood. You can't just waltz in here and disrupt everything because you don't like our methods. Actually, I can. She's my daughter. We're her grandparents, my mother added. We have rights too. Rights? I felt my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. The right to emotionally abuse an 8-year-old? The right to force her to do housework while treating her cousins like guests? What rights exactly do you think you have? We've done nothing wrong, my father insisted. Kids need to learn work ethic. Obviously, you haven't taught her that. The accusation stung because it echoed every criticism they'd made about my parenting since Willow was born. Too permissive, too soft, too protective. But looking at my daughter's chemical-burned hands and tear-stained face, I realized their definition of work ethic was actually just cruelty disguised as character building. Willow, I said gently, has anyone said mean things to you here today besides what I just heard? She nodded reluctantly. Grandpa said I was lazy because I couldn't reach the high parts of the shower. And Marcus said my dad probably left because I cry too much. My heart shattered. And what did Grandma and Grandpa say when Marcus said that? Nothing, she whispered. Grandma just told me to stop crying and finish cleaning. I looked at my parents, hoping to see some recognition of how harmful their behavior had been. Instead, I saw defensiveness and denial. Children say things. My mother dismissively waved her hand. We can't monitor every conversation. But you can certainly correct harmful lies when you hear them, I pointed out. Instead, you chose to punish Willow for having emotions about being told cruel falsehoods. We're not going to coddle her, my father said firmly. The world is tough. She needs to learn to handle criticism. She's 8 years old. And that wasn't criticism, it was emotional abuse. The room fell silent except for the sound of Willow's quiet sniffles. Brooklyn remained on the couch, suddenly very interested in her phone. Marcus and Mason had turned down the volume on their game, but were clearly listening to every word. I think we're done here, I said, taking Willow's hand. Come on, sweetie. Let's go home. Serafina, don't be hasty. My mother's tone shifted to pleading. We can discuss this like adults. We can discuss it when you're ready to acknowledge that what I witnessed today was wrong and that changes need to be made. And if we refuse, my father challenged, then you won't be seeing Willow anymore. And you can find someone else to pay your rent. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the exact moment my parents realized that their financial security and their access to Willow were connected in ways they hadn't considered. You can't be serious. Brooklyn finally spoke up. You'd cut off Mom and Dad financially over some household chores? I'd cut off anyone who treats my daughter the way I was treated growing up, I replied firmly. The only difference is that now I have the power to stop it. We left them sitting in stunned silence. In the car, Willow was unusually quiet, occasionally rubbing her still red hands. At a red light, I turned to look at her. Willow, I need you to tell me the truth about what happens when you visit Grandma and Grandpa. Everything, even if you think it might make me sad. Her story unfolded slowly as we drove through Chicago traffic. Every Tuesday and Thursday while I worked late, my parents had been assigning her increasingly difficult household chores. Scrubbing bathrooms, mopping floors, organizing closets, even cleaning baseboards with a toothbrush. Meanwhile, when Brooklyn dropped off Marcus and Mason, they were treated to snacks, entertainment, and praise. The emotional abuse was systematic. My parents constantly compared Willow unfavorably to her cousins, told her she was too sensitive, and suggested that she needed to work harder to earn her place in the family. They told her repeatedly that I spoiled her and that spending time at their house would toughen her up. Why didn't you tell me before, sweetheart? I asked gently. Grandpa said you worked really hard to pay for their house, and that I shouldn't bother you with complaints because you might get angry at me for causing problems. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. They had manipulated her into silence by using my financial support as leverage, making her feel responsible for maintaining family peace. That evening, after settling Willow with a warm bath to soothe her irritated hands and ordering her favorite pizza, I sat at my laptop and canceled the automatic rent payments to my parents' landlord. 3 years and nearly $65,000 later, my financial support was ending. Next, I called my financial advisor to redirect those monthly payments into Willow's college fund. Finally, I changed all my passwords and security questions, having learned from friends that financial manipulation often escalated when the money source was threatened. My phone started ringing within hours. I ignored the calls and let them go to voicemail. The messages ranged from confused to angry to manipulative. Sarah, honey, the rent payment didn't go through. There must be some mistake. Serafina, this is your father. Call us immediately. We need to straighten this out. Sarah, it's Mom. I'm at the bank and they're saying there's a problem with your account. Please call. By the next morning, the messages had turned more desperate. Sarah, whatever we did, we can fix it. Don't punish us like this. Your mother is beside herself. How can you do this to your own parents? I deleted them all without responding. At work, I struggled to concentrate. My assistant knocked on my office door around noon. Ms. Hayes, your mother is online too. She says it's an emergency. I considered ignoring the call, but decided it was better to establish boundaries clearly. Put her through. Serafina, thank God. My mother's voice was frantic. We've been trying to reach you all night. The bank says the rent payment was canceled. There must be some error. There's no error, Mom. I canceled the automatic payment. Silence then. But why? We can work out whatever problem you think there is. The problem is that you've been emotionally abusing Willow while I've been financially supporting you. That ends now. Abuse? Sarah, that's a very strong word. We were just teaching her responsibility. By making her scrub your bathroom with chemicals that burned her hands while her cousins played video games? By allowing them to tell her cruel lies about her father while you stood by and said nothing? Children need structure. Children need love and safety, which you clearly can't provide for Willow. So you won't be seeing her anymore, and you'll need to find another way to pay your rent. Sarah, please. We're your parents. You can't just abandon us. I'm not abandoning you. I'm protecting my daughter from the same treatment I received growing up. The difference is that I'm in a position to stop it now. I hung up before she could respond. The calls continued throughout the day, but I didn't answer them. That evening, as I was helping Willow with her homework, Brooklyn showed up at my apartment unannounced. We need to talk, she said when I opened the door. Not in front of Willow, I replied. She's had enough family drama for 1 week. I asked my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, if Willow could visit for an hour, then returned to face my sister. Mom and Dad are panicking, Brooklyn said without preamble. They can't afford the rent without your help. That's unfortunate. Sarah, they're your parents. You can't just cut them off because of some misunderstanding about chores. It wasn't a misunderstanding. I saw exactly what was happening. Willow was being treated like an unpaid servant while Marcus and Mason were treated like honored guests. Brooklyn shifted uncomfortably. Look, maybe they were a little harder on her than necessary, but a little harder? She had chemical burns on her hands from cleaning supplies an 8-year-old should never touch. Your sons told her that her father left because she was too much trouble, and our parents said nothing to correct that lie. Kids say mean things sometimes. That doesn't mean. It means that our parents are repeating the same pattern of favoritism with our children that they use with us. The difference is that you benefited from it then, and your sons benefit from it now. Brooklyn was quiet for a moment. I didn't realize it was that bad. Didn't realize or didn't want to see it because your boys were being treated well? She looked away, unable to meet my eyes. What do you want me to do about it? I want you to acknowledge that what's happening is wrong. I want you to teach your sons that making cruel comments to their cousin is unacceptable. And I want you to understand that I will not financially support people who emotionally abuse my daughter. But Mom and Dad will lose their apartment. Then maybe it's time they learn to live within their means instead of depending on their daughters to bail them out. Brooklyn left without agreeing to anything, but I could see that some of what I'd said had landed. Over the next week, my parents' attempts to contact me became increasingly desperate. They showed up at my apartment building twice, but I refused to let them up. They called my office so frequently that I had to ask my assistant to screen all calls from unknown numbers. Finally, my father left a voicemail that revealed their true priorities. Serafina, this is ridiculous. We're facing eviction because of your tantrum. If you want to punish us, fine, but don't use money as a weapon. That's not who we raised you to be. The irony was staggering. The people who had used my money for 3 years without contributing anything themselves were accusing me of weaponizing finances. They had raised me to believe that my worth was tied to what I could provide for others, and now they were angry that I was refusing to continue that dynamic. I made an appointment with a therapist who specialized in family trauma. Dr. Lisa Chun helped me understand that what I had experienced growing up and what Willow was experiencing now was a form of emotional abuse called scapegoating. In dysfunctional families, one child is often designated as the scapegoat while another is elevated as the golden child, she explained. The scapegoat is blamed for family problems and held to impossible standards, while the golden child can do no wrong. This pattern often repeats in the next generation. So Willow is becoming the new scapegoat while Marcus and Mason are the golden children?
Exactly.
And by continuing to financially support your parents while they abuse Willow, you were inadvertently enabling the cycle to continue. That session gave me the clarity I needed. I wasn't being cruel or vindictive by cutting off financial support. I was breaking a generational pattern of abuse and favoritism. Meanwhile, Willow was seeing her own therapist, a child psychologist named Dr. Maria Santos who specialized in helping children process emotional trauma. After just a few sessions, Dr. Santos requested a meeting with me. Willow is showing signs of anxiety and low self-esteem that are consistent with emotional mistreatment, she said gently. The good news is that children her age are very resilient when removed from toxic situations and given consistent positive reinforcement. Will she be okay? I asked, the knot of worry in my chest loosening slightly. With time and the right support, yes. But I strongly recommend limiting contact with her grandparents until there are significant changes in their behavior patterns. 2 weeks after I'd canceled the rent payments, my parents' landlord called to inform me that they were behind on rent and facing eviction. He'd been given my contact information as their emergency contact and wanted to know if I planned to help them. No, I said simply. They're adults who are capable of managing their own finances. But ma'am, they're elderly and they're in their early 60s, not elderly. And their financial problems are not my responsibility. That same day, Brooklyn called me in tears. Sarah, you have to help them. They're going to be homeless. They have options. They can downsize to a cheaper apartment. Dad can find full-time employment. or you and Marcus Sr. can contribute to their support. We can't afford to help them the way you can. I can't afford it either. That $1,800 a month was money that should have been going into Willow's college fund or our own savings. I was sacrificing our financial security for people who were using that generosity to abuse my daughter. They weren't abusing her, Sarah. They were just what? Just making her clean their bathroom with chemicals that burned her hands? Just allowing your sons to tell her cruel lies about her father? Just treating her like an unpaid servant while treating Marcus and Mason like royalty? Brooklyn was quiet for a long moment. I didn't know it was that extreme. Because you didn't want to know. It was easier to benefit from the favoritism than to acknowledge it was wrong. 3 weeks after I'd ended my financial support, my parents found a cheaper apartment in a less desirable neighborhood. My father had taken a full-time job at a grocery store, and my mother had increased her hours at the dental office. They were finally living within their means, but the adjustment was clearly difficult. They called to request a meeting, claiming they wanted to work things out for Willow's sake. I agreed, but only with Dr. Chen present as a mediator. The session was held in Dr. Chen's office, a neutral space designed to facilitate difficult conversations. My parents arrived looking more haggard than I'd ever seen them. The stress of financial responsibility was clearly taking its toll. Let's start by discussing why we're here, Dr. Chen began. Serafina, would you like to explain your concerns? I took a deep breath. I'm here because I want to establish clear boundaries about how Willow is treated. What I witnessed at your apartment was emotional abuse, and it wasn't an isolated incident. Willow has shared multiple examples of being treated differently from her cousins, being given inappropriate chores, and being subjected to cruel comments that you did nothing to correct. My father immediately became defensive. We weren't abusing anyone. We were teaching her responsibility and work ethic, things you clearly haven't prioritized. Robert, Dr. Chen interjected gently, can you try to understand why making an 8-year-old clean a bathroom with harsh chemicals while her cousins play video games might seem unfair from Serafina's perspective? The world isn't fair, he replied stubbornly. She needs to learn that life is hard. But why does she need to learn that lesson while her cousins don't? I asked. They're different kids with different needs, my mother said quickly. Different how? In what way does Willow need to learn that life is hard, while Marcus and Mason need to be protected from that same lesson? My parents exchanged glances, but couldn't provide an answer that didn't reveal their obvious favoritism. Dr. Chen guided us through a discussion of the specific incidents that had led to my decision to cut contact. My parents alternated between denial, minimization, and occasional glimpses of recognition that their behavior had been problematic. The breakthrough moment came when Dr. Chen asked them to consider how they would feel if someone treated their grandchildren the way they had treated me growing up. I wouldn't like it, my mother admitted quietly. And yet you repeated those same patterns with Willow, I pointed out. We didn't realize, my father said, his voice less certain than usual. That's not good enough, I replied firmly. Willow is 8 years old. She deserves better than to be your emotional punching bag while you lavish attention on her cousins. By the end of the session, we had established some ground rules. If my parents wanted to rebuild a relationship with Willow, they would need to attend regular therapy sessions to address their behavior patterns, acknowledge the favoritism, and commit to treating all grandchildren equally. Respect my parenting decisions without undermining them. Start with brief, supervised visits only after demonstrating progress. As for their financial situation, I made it clear that my support was permanently ended. You're both capable of working and supporting yourselves. It's time you learn to do that instead of depending on your children. My mother began to cry. We didn't mean for things to get so bad. We've always struggled with money, and when you offered to help. I offered to help temporarily 3 years ago. You turned it into a permanent arrangement while treating my daughter badly. Those days are over. 6 months later, our family had settled into a new normal. My parents had completed several months of therapy and were slowly learning to recognize their problematic behavior patterns. They had successfully downsized their living situation and were managing their finances independently for the first time in years. Willow was flourishing. Free from the toxic environment at my parents' apartment, she had regained her confidence and natural curiosity. Her therapist reported significant improvement in her anxiety levels and self-esteem. We had begun carefully supervised visits with my parents, always in public places or at my apartment with me present. These visits were still somewhat awkward, but my parents were making visible efforts to treat Willow with the same kindness they showed Marcus and Mason. The most significant change came when Willow accidentally spilled juice during one visit. She immediately tensed up, clearly expecting criticism or punishment. Instead, my father calmly handed her paper towels and said, "Accidents happen, sweetheart. Let's clean it up together." Later, he pulled me aside. I saw the fear in her eyes when she spilled that juice. She was afraid of me. I never want to see that look again. Brooklyn had also begun to recognize the problematic dynamics in our family. After several conversations about the favoritism we'd experienced growing up, she started working with her own therapist to address how those patterns might be affecting her parenting of Marcus and Mason. I realize now that being the favorite wasn't actually good for me, she confessed during one of our rare coffee meetings. It didn't prepare me for real life, and it damaged my relationship with you. I don't want my boys to grow up thinking they're better than their cousin. The relationship between the cousins slowly improved as well. With Brooklyn's guidance, Marcus and Mason began to understand that their previous comments to Willow had been hurtful and inappropriate. They started including her in their games and activities, treating her more like an equal than a target. A year after that terrible Wednesday afternoon, we celebrated Willow's 9th birthday with a small party at my apartment. My parents attended, bringing a thoughtfully chosen gift and interacting appropriately with all the children. Brooklyn made sure Marcus and Mason included Willow in their activities rather than excluding her. As I watched Willow blow out her candles, surrounded by people who were finally my parents attended, bringing a thoughtfully chosen gift and interacting appropriately with all the children. Brooklyn made sure Marcus and Mason included Willow in their activities rather than excluding her. As I watched Willow blow out her candles, surrounded by people who were finally learning to love her properly, I felt a profound sense of peace. The journey hadn't been easy, and there would undoubtedly be challenges ahead, but we had fundamentally changed our family's trajectory. That night, after the guests had left and Willow was tucked into bed, she asked me a question that captured everything we had been through. "Mommy, are you proud of me for learning to stand up for myself at school when kids are mean?" I sat on the edge of her bed, my heart full. "Absolutely, sweetheart. Standing up for yourself when someone treats you badly is one of the most important things you can learn. Even if it makes people angry at first, especially then. Sometimes the people who love us need to learn better ways to show it, and that can only happen if we're brave enough to tell them when they're hurting us." She nodded thoughtfully. "I think Grandma and Grandpa are learning, just like I'm learning my times tables. Sometimes it's hard to learn new things when you're older." Her wisdom amazed me. "That's very true, Willow. And I'm proud of you for being willing to give them another chance." As I reflect on our journey, I realized that cutting off my parents' rent payments wasn't really about revenge, though it might have felt that way initially. It was about refusing to fund my own daughter's mistreatment. It was about breaking the cycle of financial dependence that had enabled emotional abuse. Most importantly, it was about showing Willow that she was worth standing up for, even when it meant making difficult choices that others might not understand. The truth is, sometimes the most loving thing we can do is establish firm boundaries. Sometimes protecting those we love requires making choices that others will criticize or misunderstand. And sometimes breaking generational patterns of dysfunction requires the courage to say no more and mean it. Looking back, I'm grateful for that awful Wednesday afternoon because it forced me to confront truths I'd been avoiding. Willow deserved better than what my parents were giving her, and I deserved better than to have my financial generosity used as leverage for continued mistreatment. Our family is far from perfect, but we're healing. The cycle of favoritism and emotional manipulation that had persisted for generations has been interrupted. Willow is growing up knowing that love doesn't have to be earned through perfection or service, that she has inherent worth that doesn't depend on how useful she is to others. That lesson alone was worth every difficult conversation, every moment of guilt, and every family relationship that had to be rebuilt from the ground up. Some things are worth fighting for, and your child's emotional well-being is certainly one of them. If you're facing a similar situation, remember that setting boundaries isn't cruel, it's necessary. Protecting your children from emotional abuse isn't dramatic, it's your responsibility as a parent. And breaking cycles of dysfunction isn't easy, but it's one of the most important gifts you can give to future generations. The courage to say, "This stops with me," can change everything. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to repeat the patterns that damaged you, even when that refusal costs you relationships or financial stability. Your children's emotional health is worth more than family peace built on their suffering. Be brave enough to break the cycle. Your children are worth it. The morning sun streamed through the windows of our new house as I watched 13-year-old Willow pack her overnight bag for what had become a monthly tradition, a weekend sleepover with her grandparents. The transformation in all of us over the past 5 years still amazed me sometimes. "Mom, do you think Grandpa will remember to make his famous pancakes?" Willow asked, carefully folding her favorite sweater. "I'm sure he will, sweetheart. He's been perfecting that recipe specifically for your visits." It was hard to believe that the same man who had once made my daughter scrub bathroom floors with chemicals now spent Saturday mornings experimenting with different pancake recipes to surprise her. The change hadn't happened overnight, but it had been profound and lasting. My parents pulled into our driveway, right on time, something else that had changed dramatically. The chronic lateness and unreliability that had characterized much of my childhood had given way to a newfound respect for commitments and boundaries. Dad honked twice, their agreed-upon signal, and Willow grabbed her bag with genuine excitement. "See you Sunday evening, Mom," she called, rushing toward the door. I watched from the window as my parents embraced Willow with the kind of warmth I had always craved as a child. Mom helped her into the back seat and made sure her seatbelt was secure, small gestures that spoke volumes about how much they had grown. As their car disappeared around the corner, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The first year after I cut off their rent payments had been the hardest, filled with tense therapy sessions, carefully supervised visits, and more than a few setbacks. But gradually, painfully, we had all learned new ways of relating to each other. My parents' financial independence had been perhaps the most crucial change. Dad had not only kept his job at the grocery store but had been promoted to assistant manager. Mom had transitioned to full-time at the dental office and had even taken on additional bookkeeping work. For the first time in their adult lives, they were living within their means and taking pride in their self-sufficiency. Financial stress was making us into people we didn't want to be, Mom had admitted during one of our family therapy sessions. When we weren't worried about rent every month, we could focus on being better grandparents. The therapy had been transformative for all of us. Dr. Chun had helped my parents understand how their childhood experiences with poverty and favoritism had shaped their parenting patterns. They learned to recognize when they were falling into old habits and developed strategies for treating all their grandchildren equally. Brooklyn and I had also rebuilt our relationship, though it had taken considerable work. She had initially resented my ultimatum, as she called it, but eventually came to understand that the favoritism had damaged both of us in different ways. Her boys, Marcus and Mason, were now 15 and had developed a protective, caring relationship with Willow that warmed my heart. "Willow's like the little sister we never had," Marcus had told me recently. "We were dumb kids back then, but she's actually pretty cool." The financial decision I had made 5 years ago had ripple effects I couldn't have predicted. The $1,800 monthly payments that had once gone to my parents' rent had been redirected into multiple areas: Willow's college fund, my own retirement savings, and a small emergency fund that gave me peace of mind. I had also been able to afford the therapy that had been so crucial for our healing. Most importantly, I had learned to set and maintain healthy boundaries in all areas of my life. At work, I no longer stayed late every night trying to prove my worth. In relationships, I had learned to recognize red flags early and advocate for my needs. The confidence I had gained from standing up to my parents had transformed every aspect of my life. Willow had thrived in ways that exceeded my wildest hopes. Free from the constant criticism and unfair comparisons, she had discovered talents and interests I never knew she possessed. She was now on the debate team, played violin in the school orchestra, and had a tight-knit group of friends who valued her kindness and intelligence. Perhaps most remarkably, she had developed an emotional intelligence and empathy that astounded me. When her friend Sarah was struggling with her own family issues, Willow had been the one to suggest that Sarah talk to her parents about how she was feeling. Sometimes grown-ups don't realize they're being hurtful, Willow had explained to Sarah. But if you tell them how you feel, they might change. My grandparents did. That evening, as I prepared dinner for just the two of us for Sunday night, our tradition when Willow returned from her grandparents, my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Having such a wonderful time with Willow. She's teaching us how to play her new board game. Thank you for giving us the chance to be the grandparents she deserves. 5 years ago, I never could have imagined receiving such a message. The journey from that awful Wednesday afternoon to this peaceful Sunday evening had required courage I didn't know I possessed, difficult conversations that tested every relationship, and the willingness to prioritize my daughter's well-being over family expectations. When Willow returned that evening, full of stories about pancake experiments and board game victories, she curled up next to me on the couch for our usual Sunday night catch-up. "Mom, can I ask you something?" she said, her voice thoughtful. "Always, sweetheart. Do you ever regret making Grandma and Grandpa change? I mean, it was really hard for everyone for a while." I considered her question carefully. "Willow, do you remember how you felt when you were 8 and had to clean their bathroom while your cousins played?" She nodded. I felt sad and confused. I thought maybe I had done something wrong. "And how do you feel when you visit them now?"
Happy.
"Safe. Like they actually want me there." "Then no, sweetheart. I don't regret it at all. Sometimes love requires us to make hard choices, even when those choices are difficult or unpopular. I would make the same decision again in a heartbeat." She snuggled closer to me. "I'm glad you did. I like having grandparents who love me the right way." As I tucked her into bed that night, I marveled at the woman she was becoming. Strong, compassionate, and unafraid to advocate for herself and others. The little girl who had once scrubbed floors with tears streaming down her face had grown into a confident teenager who knew her worth wasn't tied to how useful she could be to others. The cycle was truly broken. Willow would enter adulthood knowing that love shouldn't hurt, that boundaries were healthy, and that she had the right to expect fair treatment from the people in her life. She would raise her own children, if she chose to have them, with the knowledge that favoritism and emotional manipulation weren't normal family dynamics. Looking back, I realized that the most important thing I had taught Willow wasn't about standing up to bullies or working hard in school. It was that she was worth fighting for, worth protecting, and worth the difficult conversations and changed relationships that true love sometimes requires. That lesson, that she was inherently valuable and deserving of respect, would serve her far better than any amount of money I could have continued sending to my parents. Breaking the cycle of dysfunction had been the greatest gift I could give her, even when it meant temporarily breaking our family apart to rebuild it properly. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept less than what your child deserves. Sometimes protecting those you love means making choices that others will question or criticize. And sometimes the courage to say, "This stops with me," creates space for healing that benefits everyone involved. As I turned off the lights and headed to my own room, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for that terrible Wednesday afternoon 5 years ago. It had forced me to find a strength I didn't know I possessed and had ultimately led to the loving, healthy family relationships we enjoyed today. The woman who had been too afraid to speak up for herself as a child had finally learned to roar when her own child was threatened. And that roar had reverberated through our entire family, creating positive changes that would last for generations to come. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop funding your own family's dysfunction. Sometimes the most radical act is refusing to repeat the patterns that damaged you. And sometimes breaking a cycle requires nothing more and nothing less than the courage to say, "My child deserves better than this." 5 years later, I knew without a doubt that we all deserved better. And we had finally learned how to give it to each other.